Racism is a sin that Satan perpetuates on two fronts. The outward, which is the color of your skin, and the inwards, which is the emotions that fuel blame and hate. A lot of people today have a false fixation that racism has been abated, but realistically, it's been suppressed in their minds. And social media is a cesspool of truth and hatred. And this is why Pastor Price's lengthy teaching on the subject needs to be heard from now until the end of time. Because as long as sin is a tool of Satan, then there is racism ready to rear its ugly head. Now, here's Pastor Price.
40 to 50 million were abducted or killed by our white American and European foreparents. End of quote. That's awesome, to say the least. We get upset and righteously indignant, and rightly so, when we think about Adolf Hitler and the annihilation of 6 million Jews during World War II, which was without question a tragedy. But who gets righteously indignant and upset about 50 million black Africans who were abducted or killed by the forefathers of this nation? If you ever go to Israel on a regular commercial tour of Israel, the first place that they take you to is the Holocaust Museum. And it is a sick feeling that you get in your innards when you walk through that museum and see the photographs of what one group of men did to another group of men for no other reason than they were who they were, as though they had anything to do about who they were. Where be the Holocaust Museum over 50 million black Africans? Well, I forgot, they don't count, they're just animals anyway, so forget them. Oh yeah, that's the attitude. Forget them. People want to get upset. I start talking about this and people get upset. You don't get upset with the Jews for having the Holocaust Museum. And I agree with him. I think they ought to have it. Thank God they have it. And hopefully enough people with enough brains will go there and see that mess and never be tempted to do that or let that happen again to any group of people. But what about the black Africans? Don't go there. Don't go there. I am. Don't go there. I ain't gonna say no more about that. What does he mean? Not for you, don't worry about it. Now listen to this. In the same book on page 121 and 122, Mr. Kaivo gives us an interesting view of one of our most cherished heroes, Abraham Lincoln. I always thought that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves because of a heartfelt desire to do what was right in the sight of God concerning one man enslaving another man. In other words, rectifying man's inhumanity to man. According to Mr. Kaivo, perhaps I have been wrong. What do you think? I quote, "The Civil War was a complicated political, economic, and social event. And while slavery was a key issue, the abolition of slavery was not a strong concern of the American public." As Lincoln wrote in a letter to Horace Greeley, a journalist and political leader and contemporary of Lincoln, added, "Dear sir, I have not meant to leave anyone in doubt." This is Abraham Lincoln, okay? "Dear sir, I have not meant to leave anyone in doubt. My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or destroy slavery." They didn't teach you this. If I could, listen, this is Lincoln talking. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could do it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because it helps to save the Union. End of quote. And people, you wonder why we have problems. See, this thinking, this pattern of thinking, it has been passed on from father to son, family to family. See, people don't talk about it out in the open, but they talk about it behind closed doors, and they have these attitudinal ideas about black people. That's why this thing has continued to go as long as it has. And the church is the most guilty group on planet Earth in fostering this kind of thinking. That's an eye-opening statement, just what Lincoln just said, isn't it? On page 122, Mr. Kaivel makes an insightful statement that is sure to anger some. I quote, "The second problem with moving on from slavery is that we rarely acknowledge the long-lasting effects of more than 200 years of slavery. Although slavery was officially abolished by the 13th Amendment in 1865, economic and cultural exploitation, everyday violence, including lynching, rape, physical attack, and other forms of mob violence, political disenfranchisement, and also total segregation in the South and the North continued into recent times. We have had over 350 years of economic and cultural enrichment of the white community at the expense of African Americans. The effects of that exploitation are in the present." End of quote. Now, there's one last statement that I would like to quote from Mr. Kaivel that I think puts the icing on the cake of this issue of racism in America. On page 110, he says, and I quote, "We cannot build trust and an honest commitment to creating equality in this country if we are denying the injustices of the past. Our good faith efforts to change the system will not be taken seriously if we continue to deny or distort the record of white racism." End of quote. That's awful, but it's awesome. I hope you're hearing me. America has a lot that it must answer for. I don't want you to get the idea that white racism is peculiar to the United States. It is worldwide. For instance, we have all heard of apartheid in South Africa, but we need to realize that most of our information about it is from the media, which is controlled by the white power structure. I think it will be of interest for our present study to hear from some Africans themselves who have had to live under the South African brand of racism. In a book entitled "The Church and Racism, a Black South African Perspective" by, again, I apologize if I don't pronounce these words because I don't know what, let me spell it, Zolile. Zolili, Mbali. Zolile Copyright by the same person, 1987. Published by SCM Press Limited, London, England. The author points up the same general facts about racism that we have already seen in our study. On page 11, the author states, and I quote, "So the economic reason for apartheid can be seen as cheap labor." America can relate to that because it be the past master of cheap labor. This nation's wealth was built on the back of cheap labor. Cheap meaning nothing. But let me quote the author again. So the economic, and I'm quoting, "So the economic reason for apartheid can be seen as cheap labor. The existence of cheap labor sustains the high standard of living of the whites." And this is an African, wrote a book in South Africa about South Africa. But you know that the devil has a MasterCard too. You know, he flies from one country to the other, so you know he's not just limited to one country. It sounds like America, don't you think? He further states on page 15, and I quote, "The World Council of Churches' concern over racism goes back to the General Assembly held at Uppsala in 1968. Section 4 of the Uppsala report reads, A, in parentheses, racism is linked with economic and political exploitation." End of quote. Doesn't that sound just like what we read from Mr. Keivel and Paul Anderson, Dr. Claude Anderson? See, it's the same thing. See, racism is economic. We are back at the same point that Mr. Keivel and Dr. Anderson pointed out to us. Racism is, as I said, economical and political exploitation. Whether America or South Africa, it's the same old garbage. Mr. MBALI goes on to say on page 18, under heading B, rationale for an ecumenical program to combat racism. That's the subtitle. Okay? Page 18, under B, rationale for an ecumenical program to combat racism. Under numeral 2, we have sadly to recognize that in spite of the battle that has been fought against racism by the churches, mission agencies and councils of churches, with often heroic personal sacrifice, racism is now a worse menace than ever. We have also sadly to confess that churches have participated in racial discrimination. Many religious institutions of the white northern world have benefited from racially exploitive economic systems. Many church members are unaware of the facts of racism and of the involvement of their religious and secular institution in its perpetuation. Lacking information about institutionalized racism and about the possibility of developing sophisticated strategies to secure racial justice, Christians often engage in irrelevant and timid efforts to improve race relations. Too little and too late. End of quote. Now, I want you to get the enormity of this because this statement was made in 1969. Now, I want to refer to one more statement that Mr. MBALI makes that I think every American and every person who styles himself a Christian should think about very seriously. I think that the future of our nation and the church rests upon the recognition of the truth revealed in this statement. On page 17, Mr. MBALI states, under Roman numeral 2, recommendation regarding an ecumenical program to combat racism. Under numeral 1, and I'm quoting, since its inception, The World Council of Churches has consistently denounced the sin of racism. You didn't get that? Oh, you missed a good time to shout. You missed that. Listen, since its inception, the World Council of Churches has consistently denounced the sin of racism. The World Council is saying that racism is a sin. And if it's sin, it should be repented of. And repentance means stop doing it. That's one reason why our nation is going through the hell it's going through. This nation has never repented. I said the nation has never repented. Listen now. Since its inception, the WCC, World Council of Churches, has consistently denounced the sin of racism. That's the bottom line issue. Racism, called by any other name, is still a sin. And sin must be dealt with. The question must be asked, how did or what allowed America to get into the position of being racist or color prejudiced against black people? How'd that happen? How'd that start? Where did it come from? We know that slavery was and is an economic proposition. But what conditions prevailed that allowed WASP, so-called Christian men and women, to condone racism and racial prejudice? And if you don't know what the WASPs are, W-A-S-P, I'll tell you. White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. I didn't coin the word. This is a word I picked up in my research. That's how they refer to themselves. White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. We need to look at that question. How so-called Christian men and women could condone racism and racial prejudice. We need to look at this very carefully so that we can see how to reverse the situation. We definitely have some monstrous racial problems both in secular America and in the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ. What could enter the minds of intelligent, rational, thinking people that would cause them to mistreat a whole race of people who had never done anything negative to them, to treat them in a way in which they themselves would not want to be treated? The cause, the big lie, black people are inferior. This has been taught in the schools, in the homes, and in the history of this nation. The lie must be corrected. Some people will deny this assertion and will attempt to defend themselves. They will become angry with me and threaten to stop watching the program or financially stop supporting the program. All I can say is do what you have to do, because I must do what I have to do. And notice, I didn't say all. So if you're not guilty, you don't have to get upset. If you're not a part of the problem, then you must be a part of the solution. Jesus said it this way. See, there is no middle ground. There is no neutrality. Jesus said it this way. Real simple, cut to the chase. Jesus said, if you're not for me, you are against me. That's it. It's that simple. That's how he interprets it. You may say, well, I'm not for and I'm not against Jesus. I'm neutral. He says, if you're not for him, you are against him. And I say, if you're not for me, you are against me. Let's look at some historical documentation to see if there is any validity to what I have said in regards to the lie about the inferiority of the black man. If we do not know what causes our thinking patterns about other people, we can never make any corrective adjustments. Before we get into the historical documentation, I feel it necessary to address the possible criticism that may be leveled at me from some African Americans concerning why would I bring up racism, racial prejudice, slavery, and all of the other unpleasant things of the past. Actually, that is a very legitimate question. And frankly, I really don't mind being asked. From a book entitled The Journey of the Songhay People, copyright 1987, by Calvin R. Robinson, Redmond Battle, and Edward W. Robinson, Jr., the authors answer this question for me in a way that leaves little room for debate. Why would I bring this up? Why would we talk about all this stuff? Why plumb the depths of the past? This book, I don't even have to answer the question. They answer it for me. On page 21 of this book, The Journey of the Songhay People, they state, and I quote, oh, you got to get this. If you don't get this, then you're not interested in blacks. If you're a black person and you don't get this, you're not interested in yourself. And if you're a white person and you don't get this, you're not interested in us. Now get this. I quote, knowledge of race history is to the race exactly as an individual's memory is to that individual. Let me drop that on you again, because that's heavy. That this deep. We going deep now. You got to get this though. You got to get this. Listen to this, because I know that this thing just went to the air today, and when the rest of it gets to the air, people are gonna. I know what black folks gonna do. The field folk. They're gonna be upset with me. They're gonna denounce me. They're gonna talk me. Now you watch it. Your friends and relatives, they'll do the same thing. Oh, the house. Yeah, that's the house. I'm sorry. No, the field folk. They're the good folk. Yeah, we the field folk. Hey, field folk. I'm sorry. I meant the house folks. You know them house people? They're gonna jump all over me about this. But here, get this now. Quote, knowledge of race history is to the race exactly as an individual's memory is to that individual. The masses of African Americans suffer from partial cultural amnesia because of a certain deliberate program which wiped the slates of our memories clean of true African events prior to the cotton fields of America. But the monsters who perpetrated this cultural genocide were not satisfied. After wiping the memory slate clean, they wrote upon those slates a series of vicious lies. They wrote on the slates, on the minds of all, black and white alike, that the African is really an ape which can speak. They wrote on the slates of the minds of all that the African evolved in the heartland of the jungles of Africa, where not even the faintest glimmer of light of science and learning could penetrate. They wrote on those slates that this African subhuman has neither the genetic ability to learn nor the ability to behave properly. They programmed all of this upon the minds of all, black and white alike, end of quote. I agree with this because the history of this nation bears it out. On page 23 and 24 of the same book, they ask an important question and answer it superbly. Why study modern history or any history at all? Two of the greatest benefits that can be derived from the knowledge of history is not only the receiving of a better understanding of the present, but more importantly, that knowledge of history will provide the information with which to shape the future. Place yourself in the position of a successful businessman who, as a result of an accident, has a sudden loss of your memory. You would not know where your office is, nor how to get there. You would not know what successes you had achieved, what you are supposed to do today, nor how to plan for future successes. For all of your knowledge and experience would be entirely lost. You would have to start all over again. You would not know the reasons for your present situation. You could not call on experience and knowledge to plan for a successful future. If your business rival stole your records, they could tell you all kinds of falsehood. They could reduce you to an impoverished, blubbering idiot. That condition is called amnesia. Amnesia is not just limited to individuals. A whole race can have amnesia. It is a truism that history is to the human race what memory is to the individual. Now, that's awesome. But how true? Cicero, first century Roman writer, statesman, and orator said, and I quote, this is awesome. Listen to this. There is very little that is more important for any people to know than their history, culture, traditions, and language. For without such knowledge, one stands naked and defenseless before the world. End of quote. We don't know where we came from. All of our names are white names, taken from the slave masters. We don't know what our ancestors called us. They wiped the slates clean. That's why we've been defensive, because we don't know self. We don't know where we came from. Someone else has well said, and I quote, "He who does not understand the past is doomed to repeat it." End of quote. These statements sum up in a nutshell my reasons for bringing up the past. Moving right along. Let's examine some documentation that sheds more light on how this inferiority of the black man lie got started. Oh, this is in a book entitled Infected Christianity by Alan Davies, copyright 1988 by McGill Queen's University Press, page 13, the author states, and I quote, "The philosopher David Hume who happened to be an 18th century Scottish historian and philosopher. The philosopher David Hume had this to say about the black man, and I quote, "I am apt to suspect the Negroes and in general all the other species of men, for there are 4 or 5 different kinds, to be naturally inferior to the whites. There never was a civilized nation of any other complexion than white, nor even any individual eminent either in action or speculation. No ingenious manufacturers amongst them, no arts, no sciences." End of quote. And I mean, I can understand how he could come up with that. I mean, I could see that. I mean, how in the world, I mean, you know, ignorant black folk couldn't have done anything but build pyramids. I mean, that's, you know. You know. Apes. Yeah, they built the pyramids. And modern science, they still don't know how them folk built them to this day. They still can't figure out how they got them stones up on top. These are people that don't have no science. But these are the kinds of attitudes that have been promulgated down through time. And some of you got these attitudes in you now. You know it, and I know it, and God knows it. And you need to be cleansed. You need to be washed. And I need to quit because I am out of time. We walk by faith.
Okay, now to be fair, I want to get back to what Lincoln had said about slavery. So Abraham Lincoln's views on the Union and freeing the slaves were complex and evolved over time. One of his most famous statements on the matter comes from a letter he wrote to Horace Greeley in 1862. Now in it, Lincoln emphasized that his primary goal was to save the Union, whether that meant freeing all the slaves, none of the slaves, or some of the slaves, he wrote. He said, "My paramount objective in this struggle is to save the Union and is not either to save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all of the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would do that also. What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps to save the Union, and what I forbear. I forbear because I do not believe it would help to save the Union." Lincoln also famously stated, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," highlighting his belief that the nation could not endure permanently half slave and half free. These quotes reflect Lincoln's pragmatic approach to the issue of slavery, always with the preservation of the Union as his foremost concern. So, first and foremost, he was always about the Union. Enough said.